We're with Teresa Connell today, and she's a regression hypnotherapist. How are you today?
I'm wonderful, Steve. It's nice to be back. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, this is a topic that is really engaging for me, and still I know there's a lot of people out there who have not uh, much knowledge about
Mhm,
regression hypnotherapy, especially. It's a
mhm.
subset of hypnotherapy. So I'd like you to describe how did you first become interested in regression hypnotherapy?
Well, when I was 35, I moved to New Mexico, and I never really felt like I belonged anywhere. And I call this my spirituality road 101, and I bought my first Sylvia Browne book. So I am a product of Sylvia Browne until I outgrew her, of course. So thank God. I'm not pointing any fingers, but
Mhm.
no one taught me, no one taught me what spirituality was beyond the religion that I was raised.
Mhm.
And there was more to my life, I felt, that I didn't get any answers for. And I would notice things that I didn't understand, and I just didn't fit in this world. And I really, really wanted to get the answers, so I felt like I belonged. And I started reading her books because I would just feel things. And if you can't explain it, it doesn't exist. That was the world that I grew up in. And then when I read her book on past life regression, I said, oh my God, Steve, the world isn't flat. It's not flat. It's round. And then all of a sudden, it opened up the doors to a whole new paradigm in my life that gave me a sense of belonging. I didn't know where I belonged. I went from one book to another, but it was like going to um, a clothing store and looking for that perfect shirt. You try on 15 and then you come home with that perfect shirt and you're loyal to that shirt because it meant something to you.
Mhm.
And so as I was searching on my spiritual path and I would read this author and that author and this author and that author, that's how I evolved. So I'm a product of many different spiritual people that have given me, you could say, my own personal education because I wasn't raised in a family environment that supported it.
So you're a seeker,
Yes, I
basically.
guess that's a good way to put it.
So how did you first become interested in hypnotherapy and especially the regression hypnotherapy?
Well, after I read the book from Sylvia Browne, and I'm sorry I can't remember it, but that's when I said, oh, I've got to do that. I want to be a hypnotherapist. I did not even have a past life regression at that time. I just knew this is what I wanted to be, this is what I wanted to do.
Mhm.
And so I started down that road of going to find a school that I could learn from and then eventually work.
Cool.
And really, it's the scrim, the screen of me really wanting to heal myself. And I've
Mhm.
mentioned that before.
Okay.
But it was my way of saying I can do that this way because it's like watching love stories and reading different books. When people are born, they're born with a blueprint or a fingerprint that is so unique to themselves. And I've mentioned before, I call that their soul fabric. And we all come in with this soul fabric. But what happens is when we come into this life, sometimes it's been damaged from other lives that have not been repaired.
I see.
So when we come into this life and we might have tears or spots on our soul fabric, past life regression is one way that we can heal that fabric. There are many other types of ways we can heal it. But today I just want to focus on past life regression, this one particular way that works extremely effectively and deeply.
Now, I know a lot of people have some fears about being hypnotized. So, what are some of the common misconceptions that people bring to you that you'd like to address, let's say?
Well, beyond fear, they're afraid that I'm going to somehow rewire their brain. And hypnosis is like a good boy with a bad reputation.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, isn't it?
Yes.
Probably because of all the uh, infamous stage hypnotists that make people run around and act like
Exactly.
chickens and things like
And,
that.
and, and for a human to feel vulnerable is like the worst place to be. We always have to be in control and have composure because
Hmm.
then we're like together.
Hmm.
So it's the fear of being vulnerable.
I see.
Mhm.
So, how would you approach people who want a session and are afraid at the same time?
With kid gloves. And what I mean by that is I will have a session with them prior to having a past life regression session. In
Hmm.
other words, a one-on-one talk session.
I see.
Because sometimes what they need is they need a little bit more time to feel safe with the person
Mm.
that they are going to eventually open up that closet and look at what they've been hiding for many, many, many years. And so it's easier for them to have some sort of intimate connection with them and to know that they pick somebody who they feel safe with.
So it's all about trust.
Yes,
Trust with the therapist, whatever kind of therapist it is, really,
exactly.
you know. So, regarding past life regression hypnotherapy, how do you know if someone isn't making up the life that they're describing when they're in the session?
That's a good question because a lot of people ask that. It's because 99.99% of the lives tend to be more on the mundane side.
Hmm. What do you
It's
mean?
mundane meaning it's like another life scenario, in a different time and place. Regret, loss of love, death. It's like the days of our lives. A
So,
never ending soap opera. And so if they were to make it up, it would be something very disjointed.
I see. Well, that kind of brings me to the question of, I have a friend who is thinks he was Sir Richard Burton in a past life, and he's done mountains of research. He's gone to England and gone to the museum. He also thinks that he was a certain pharaoh way back in the Egyptian times.
Right.
And I understand a lot of people do have these fantasies that
Hmm.
they were somebody important, somebody famous.
Hmm.
How often is that the case in your experience?
Well, when I first thought about that, I went like this: it doesn't exist. I don't have the answer, so it doesn't exist. And then I realized I needed to look deeper and really find out the true answer. And the best answer that I came up with is the fact that when we are born again, sometimes some of us have not had as many lives here on earth as others. So, what it is it's called a life imprint. You get the imprint of the experience, the learning as being someone famous, as being someone like Elvis, rising to the top
Hmm.
and then all of a sudden disappearing from society and having to struggle with drugs and personalities and money and fame. And so there are these basic life themes of being wealthy or being a king and a queen or someone like that. And so it's easier to imprint that information into that soul so they have an idea when they are born on earth. Say they get imprinted maybe 4 or 5 lives, different types of lives. So they're not so, you could say, young on this planet.
Hmm.
They have some information to go by.
So to me, it sounds like it would almost be like going to the library and picking up a biography or two
Yes.
and reading that and steeping yourself in that person's life and almost owning it so you can like going to a movie and experiencing someone else's existence. Is that what you're really saying?
Exactly. Exactly. It's like the Matrix. when Neo got imprinted how to do kung fu. It's similar like that. You have that imprint, and so it's kind of like you can call it a cheater.
I must cheat a lot then because I read a lot of books. I understand that there are various levels of trance that one could go into. Could you describe for our viewers what levels of trance are possible to go into? What is kind of the average?
The average is a medium to deep trance. And I've grappled over the thought of having every client in different trances and me focus on how deep they go. What I have found is when I work with a client who is there to heal their soul fabric, I found that it is imperative that they be a part of the process.
In a past life regression, how do people experience their death? I know that's a big part of doing past life regressions, not only experiencing important parts of that particular life to find out where the problems might be or the joy, but when they experience their death, do they feel the pain necessarily? If there is pain?
No, what they do experience, some depending on how visual, each client has their own approach to how they are blended or a part of the story, their story. So some view it like a reporter or they view it like it's a movie screen. Some clients are right into that body and they feel everything that happens. Feel it in meaning they can hear the sounds of the city and the street and the honking, and they could really feel their body and feel what it feels like to be male or female. I have a wonderful story to share with you. I had a client who started getting shark dreams when she turned 18. And she was bombarded with these terrible dreams and memories of sharks.
Sharks.
Sharks. Sharks. And her mother knew of me and said, you know, why don't you just go ahead and have a session with Teresa? Maybe she can make sense in it because I can't. So when I talked to the young lady, she explained to me that she never learned how to swim, and that when her mother took her to the pool to learn how to swim, her lips would turn blue and she'd get out of the pool.
Wow.
So we went back in time, and she was a he, and she was in trade on a ship to go to India from Britain to bring musical instruments like pianos, and then trade those and load up tea and spices from India and bring them back. So what happened is when the boat came through and it was near Madagascar in the east of Africa, evidently the waters are very warm there and there was no wind to move the sails, so they were stuck. So this was end of 1700s, 1800s, and there are two ships approaching, and they were African pirate ships.
Oh boy.
So, yep, they got on the boat and killed everyone. He was a young boy, so he went down below and hid with the chickens. And after they stole everything, they used their cannons and blew up the vessel.
Nice.
So here he is hanging on a piece of wood, and all of a sudden he sees the chickens bobbing up and down and going, bloop, that one's gone. Bloop, that one's gone. And then, of course, you know the story.
Those were appetizers.
Yes.
For the sharks, huh?
Yes. And the last thing that he saw was the, looking down, he felt something rub against his leg, was the big white head of the jaws of a white shark opening up and then taking up his legs. And then, yeah. Now, this individual didn't feel any pain.
But the fear.
But the fear. And what happens is when a individual, when people die early, this boy died at 18. He died at the same year that my client started having the bad dreams.
Oh.
So there's a correlation.
The connection.
Exactly. So all of a sudden that little marker on her soul fabric woke up at the age of 18 going, oh my gosh, I'm going to get eaten.
I better not go in the water.
Yes, I better not go in the water.
Wow.
So what I like to do is when a client dies and not of old age and has their family around them at the bed and they're peaceful and they've had a wonderful life, I always ask, well, what is your regret before you go? What are those last few thoughts that you have, knowing that you're going to be eaten by this shark? And the boy said, I never could afford to try that tea and have biscuits and cream. And this person, this young woman, said her favorite pastime is tea time.
I don't blame them. I love tea myself.
Yes. And then the wisdom in that life was really important is the boy said, all I did was work and I didn't play. And I worked. He was an orphan. His parents and his sister died in the plagues. And so what I do is when a young client, when a client loses their life early on, I have whoever is ready to greet them when they pass. So in the past life regression, you get to be able to experience who's there to take you back to the other side. Mm-hmm. And it was his sister. And then he met his mother and father. And then what's nice about this particular story is when I mentioned, well, how long did it take for your parents and sister to pass? Oh, it wasn't long at all. It was 2 weeks. And I said, and how long did it take for that shark to take you to pass? Oh, it wasn't long. It was about 2 minutes. Mm-hmm. So in reflection, he understood. And what was wonderful is I could see the physio with this client understanding that it wasn't about the death of the shark. Really what this life was all about was the vulnerability. Being vulnerable again. Being vulnerable and dying at that minute, being vulnerable.
Great story. So what would you say your clients are generally seeking when they decide to have a past life regression?
It's like somehow the clients that come to seek me, there's a missing piece of their life puzzle. And they're coming to seek that missing piece so that their own life makes sense to them. Their family members make sense to them. The people that they choose to marry or choose to be together or whatever gender they choose to love makes sense to them. So there are no regrets. I have found over and over again that all we want to do is to be loved and avoid regret. A good example is another story. And the story takes place in San Francisco during the gold rush.
All right. And I was there.
Yeah.
In a past life.
Oh, well, this guy comes from, I think, Michigan. Young boy comes from Michigan, and he wants to get rich. And, of course, when we get there, we find out we're not going to get rich. Mm-hmm. And he's really good with engines, so he's working on anybody's engine. I think it was, from what I recall, the engines for the trains. And he was hanging out. He didn't make a lot of money, so he'd hang around Chinatown because he could get a lot of food for 1 coin, he would say. He'd be real full. And he'd go to this one favorite Chinese restaurant, and it was owned by a Chinese family, and there was a girl. And he fell in love with this girl, but he could never bring himself up to talk to her. Time passed, and the girl was then marrying an old man of their friends, a Chinese man. And he regretted not taking the risk to ask for her hand in marriage because he loved her so much. 3 years later, he got some sort of infection and died. And so I asked, what is your regret? And he said, my regret was that I didn't ask her. I was afraid to ask her. I had a lot of fear. So what I found in this work is what happens if I allow that client to maybe retrace their steps, time travel, go back in time, and then relive that moment all over again, and let's see how the scenario plays out. So this is something that I thought, let's look into that. So when he went back in time and he said to the parents, I would like to marry her, he married her. They had kids. They were happy. He lived to be an old man, and he was pleased. He was happy.
Wow.
So I've noticed that it's really helped a soul, that soul fabric that brings regret in from a past life, to help heal that regret. Another really good story is a client who went back in the day of Mao. He worked for Mao in China. Oh. And he revered this man, and he loved this man, and he believed every word he said. And his word was golden. And then he was sent to the northwestern part of China, in a very remote area near Mongolia and Kazakhstan, along that Silk Road area. And he was told that he had to prepare the people to learn the real way, the right way, the true way, the only way, right? Mm-hmm. And what he found is he would sit in this yurt and talk to this Mongolian man, this old Mongolian man, and he would learn the life stories and realize that this has happened over and over again in their culture, where someone from the big city decides that there is a right way to control the people, to teach the people. And it happened over generations and generations. And when the old man was dying, he says, please share my stories. Please share my stories. Don't let this history die with me. So the young man was called back to Beijing, and he knew that this wasn't right. So here he was back in Beijing, and he realized that these people didn't need help. They didn't need change. They were more alive and happy than he'd ever seen people in his life before. And he couldn't say anything because he would be shot on the spot. Right. And he got married, he had a baby, and he was numb. And he died numb because he didn't live his truth. And his regret was he wasn't able to collect those stories. And so he came back in this life to collect those stories. So sometimes when you don't finish a life and you leave it with regret, you come back in another life, in another instance. So he came back as an American, someone who doesn't have obligation to their party, obligation to family, obligation to their religious structure, and they have the freedom to follow and finish a life that they were not able to because it was impossible.
So this gentleman, when he came to you, he didn't really have an issue to work on? Or did
his issue was, why don't I like America? I don't feel like I belong in America. I don't want to live in America. And I just want to know why I feel like I belong somewhere else. And I've been drawn to Asia all my life.
But it sounded like, from what he discovered in his past life regression, that he now chose America because he could have freedom, where in China he couldn't have freedom.
Right. So what happened was he realized he had the freedom to go back to that area and collect the stories.
He still had a hook.
He still had a hook. Well said. He still had a part two.
In doing these past life regressions, have you observed any serious side effects or complaints coming from your clients? Any problems?
That's the wonderful thing about hypnosis, is there are no side effects. Absolutely no side effects. The only complaints that I have from my clients, as a rule, is they feel that they don't go deep enough. And then afterwards I ask them, so how long do you think you were in this hypnotic trance? Oh, about 30, maybe 40 minutes. How about 2 hours? How about 1.5 hours? Oh no, I remember everything. Wonderful that I'm able to record the CD, and then they're able to go over the material later. And then I never have any complaints after they listen to the CD. But I think that they have a different expectation when they think about hypnosis, because they think about maybe it's mind altering. Maybe, you know, I put you in this deep trance and you're like in Never Never Land with Peter Pan.
So you've never had a case where, let's say, they were experiencing something traumatic and they kind of got stuck there? Anything like that?
No, what I watch is I watch the physio. And if they look like they're uncomfortable, and usually when they're uncomfortable, their body tightens up. And then I will just simply ask, because I'm the co-pilot. And I watch them, and I am there to give them the most wonderful, rewarding journey that I can possibly offer them. And I will ask, do you wish to continue? Now, usually when a client comes to a place in time where it could be very traumatic for them, I skip that part. So I'll go 15 minutes prior to that, or I'll go 15 minutes after that. There was one client when I was first starting out in this business who wouldn't even go to that spot. And I tried to get her and get her and get her to go to that spot in time. But it was like that section of the life was wiped clean. She was not ready to see it, nor was it needed for her healing. So your subconscious really does help you pick and choose what you're ready to see. It will not show you what you're not ready to see ever, ever, ever. The only time that I've gotten a little squirrely is when I work with somebody who is extremely creative, extremely visual, and then they just dive right in and they're a part of it. And so I just kind of pull them back if they look uncomfortable.
So there is a guiding intelligence. You call it the subconscious. Some people call it the higher self.
Yes.
But there is that intelligence that is also co-piloting the session.
Yes.
Right?
I'm the middleman.
You're the engineer,
Yeah.
the co-pilot, whatever. That's cool. Now, has anybody ever suddenly come out of a session because they just needed to come out right away?
Actually, it's very, very rare, and it's happened to me twice. And what happens is when somebody goes into a session and then all of a sudden pulls themselves out, that is a sign that they're not ready to change.
So it's the same idea.
They're
the
like,
third
oh, no. You're not supposed to see this part of me because I want to stay just the way I am. Because if they stay just the way they are, they get the attention from the people who want to save them.
I learned somewhere in the deep dark past that this is called secondary gain from an illness or a situation that you perpetuate, so that, let's say I work with the disabled for 13 years, and I think a lot of people, if you told them you could heal them of whatever their disability is, and a lot of it's not physical, they probably wouldn't want to because they would lose their benefits.
Right, exactly.
So that's an example.
Yes.
Have you noticed some kind of a common theme in your work?
I mentioned it before. The common theme I find is healing the soul fabric, healing the trauma, healing the I call them rips and tears in their soul fabric that they have brought into this life, and also ones that might have occurred depending on which family they picked to grow up in and experience whatever they experienced. So the common theme is to heal their soul fabric, and past life regression is one of quite a few different types of modalities that can heal the soul fabric. But this one is becoming more and more popular because it is so effective for a one time deal.
Mm-hmm. In other words, you get a lot of bang for your buck.
You get a lot of bang for your buck. And the more you trust your client, the more bang for your buck. So if anyone is looking into this, my suggestion for them is don't look for credentials in a past life regressionist, because you're playing out ego. So you might find a regressionist that has more ego than heart. Mm. So it's important for you to interview them. Mm. Who is going to be worthy enough to connect with your soft underside belly, you know, that vulnerable part of you. Mm. And so I always mention to people who are looking into me, talk to 3 different regression therapists, and you're going to know just in your heart who to work with. Because even if they don't have as much experience, if you have a connection with them, you're going to open up the doors. And if you open up your door wider and let them in, you will heal all the more. So it's not the school, it's the tool.
There are a lot of skeptics, as
yes.
we both know. What do you say to them about this topic?
Well, it's interesting because that is something that we come across. One of the things that I say to them is, you don't have to believe in past lives. If you believe in healing, what does it matter if it's just another story you're reviewing or a metaphor? If you believe in healing, that's more important. But don't discount something. Don't see the world as flat if you haven't considered meeting myself or anyone else halfway.
Thank you, Teresa Connell, for taking the time to have this interview. I learned a lot, and I'm sure anyone watching this will learn as well.
And Steve, I wanted to mention that I really am thankful for you inviting me here today. I feel that we really make it a great team. Thank you very much.